So, do you really need to be on a Spotify playlist? Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Stein, and today I'm addressing the question, do you, as an independent artist, need to be on a Spotify playlist? Now, if you are like me at all, you have seen a lot of YouTube videos, you've seen a lot of Instagram stories of people in the music business, maybe an A&R, maybe a label representative, or maybe even a successful artist or dozens of successful artists. I've seen a lot on YouTube because of the video and the content that I make. A lot of videos are suggested to me, and I see a lot of people that are kind of similar to me saying particular things about what an independent artist should do and how they could get to a place that they want to be in their music career. And so I asked this question to honestly address, with no incentive from Spotify, no incentive really at all, to just my own investigation into, do you need a Spotify playlist? And I'm going to walk you through some of the, I guess you could say, research that I've done in order to kind of demonstrate what I mean by this. First, I'm going to talk about kind of the theories of being a successful artist in relation to Spotify playlists. And then I'm going to show you the hard evidence. So let's start with the theory. There's really I'm going to make this very, very broad and exaggeratedly broad, very binary, using Spotify playlists and not using Spotify playlists. So here's the thing. If you or anybody becomes successful in this day and age, it's typically, I guess you could say traditionally, from a fan base, a loyal fan base, whether that's people on social media that you interact with, that you reach with. You hear, there was a recent email that I received from CD Baby about this artist named Lucidius. I'd never heard of him. He's a rapper, but he raps specifically about his own depression and struggles with thoughts of suicide. Now, whatever you think about him, I don't know him. I don't know anything about his music really, except for what that article said. But it's a good example of someone who has built a fan base, and that fan base has streamed his music and bought his albums and gone to his shows. You might have heard stories, early stories about the Beatles, for example, building a fan base at local pubs in Liverpool and in Hamburg, Germany, and those people kind of propelling them into stardom by their shows that they did for years. Okay, so broadly speaking, you as an artist or as an independent artist they're going to get maybe a local buzz by performing, and through their performances they build up a larger audience to where they can tour regionally or maybe within their local city, build enough of a buzz to maybe get attached to another act or open for them. And then the fan base steadily grows. Now, that's the traditional way. On the other hand, this is just my opinion, but this is my opinion of why Spotify playlists have become so popular, is that you don't necessarily need a fan base in order to get your music streamed. And here's what I mean. And I'll show you the evidence of this in just a minute. I'll share my screen. If you get on a Spotify playlist, and here's the pros and cons. The pros is that if you have a popular playlist like lo-fi chill hip hop or rap caviar or Americana or indie music, these various playlists that have millions of listeners, if one of your songs gets on that playlist, then that particular song is going to get a ton of plays because there's a lot of passive listeners. There's a lot of people that listen to playlists. And so if yours is in the mix and it has, let's say, 10 million listeners, your song is probably going to get 10 million listens. If someone listens to the entire playlist, it's basically a guarantee that your songs are going to get played. Now that's only for the songs that are in the playlist. Now, it's great. It's great if you get on a playlist and you start to generate some plays and therefore money. And maybe even someone listening to the playlist says, oh, I like this song. And then they click to the details and they find you or the particular artist. Now, the problem with this is that it's deceptive for the artist, and it's deceptive to the people who are seeing the artist profile. Because if you look at the numbers, and a lot of the numbers aren't visible on the app Spotify, you have to open up kind of the desktop app, which has a lot more information. But if it's just one song, let's say, because for people that are starting out, getting one song on a Spotify playlist is pretty tough. So maybe multiples, maybe not. But the success of the artist, you see, if they kind of break with a Spotify playlist, their success and their longevity and the duration of their music career depends on the playlist. So if someone has a bunch of streams because of a playlist, but they don't have many followers of that particular artist's channel, if the Spotify playlist changes the rotation of music or drops that song, then all of the streams for that particular artist are going to go to zero or whatever it was before the playlist. Now, of course, the playlist may draw more and more people to that artist to be a subscriber. In the same way advertisement draws people to go to a particular store. That's true. Spotify playlists have, I'm sure in the past, have led people to go to that particular artist's page if the music is good enough. Of course, that's just natural. But I can imagine that there are a lot of artists, a lot of recording artists who have music on Spotify playlists. They get a bunch of plays, and then when their music gets dropped from the playlist, which is normal, they lose all their income. And maybe that person quit. Maybe that person quit their job at the bank or at McDonald's or at the furniture store or at the call center thinking, oh my gosh, I have 100,000 plays this month. I'm going to quit because I made $800 or $1,000. And then all of a sudden they realize, oh, that was because of the playlist. That wasn't because of fans. That wasn't something that I can take off the platform and generate income and generate relationships with people who actually like the music and me as an artist. So let's jump into some examples of what I'm saying, because what I am suggesting is if you go to the artist, this is not picking on any artist, but this is just showing artists examples of what I'm saying. That you have monthly listeners and then you have subscribers. Subscribers are typically more people who have gone to your page and have chosen to follow you as an artist. And monthly listeners includes all plays, including indirect plays through things like Spotify playlists. So I'm going to share my screen and we'll get into it right now. Okay, so here we go. Let's just start with the big guns at the top. So this is the Spotify, a screenshot of Ariana Grande's Spotify playlist page. And as you can see, she is third in the world in monthly listeners. So this is all the songs that are played, whether it's directly from her page or through a Spotify playlist. Now, as you notice, she has a pretty good ratio of followers. Now, I would, of course, this is just like social media. Anybody who has followers knows that they're not always legitimate fans. Like, for example, I have Instagram followers that probably never engage with my content and probably don't even know who I am. Maybe they're even bots. But she has a pretty good ratio of around 1.23, I guess you could say. So for every follower she has 1.23 listeners. So I'm suggesting, and we'll get as we get into the research, you get the data here, you'll notice that the big artists that are kind of megastars have a lower ratio, meaning that they have almost just as many followers as listeners. And the people that are kind of in the danger zone of being famous through Spotify but don't have many followers, you'll see will have a bigger ratio, meaning that for every follower, they'll have a lot more listens, which means that they don't have true fans. Okay, so Ariana Grande, 1.2 ratio here for every follower, monthly listeners. Let's go up the list. So Ed Sheeran, okay, another example. So if you notice on Ariana Grande, she has a certain amount of followers and more listeners. Notice that Ed Sheeran has more followers than he does listeners, which is interesting, which means that he may have some bots, or he may have people that know about him. He's such a big artist and global artist among different genres that there probably are people that just subscribe to his page but may not necessarily listen to his music. Okay, so this is kind of the exact opposite of someone who's just starting out that may have very little followers and more listeners. But he has actually a negative ratio. It's almost the exact same as Ariana Grande's, except in reverse. So notice he's 7th in the world in monthly listeners, and yet he has managed to get more followers than people listening to his music. This is a classic example of someone who is a megastar. Let's keep going. Beyonce. Beyonce, we know, is iconic R&B singer. She has 42 million listeners on Spotify and 23 million. So she has a little bit larger ratio, 1.8. So it's still under 2. So the people that follow Beyonce are the people who are listening. The people who have gone onto Beyonce's page are the people who are following her. That means that most of her listeners, like previously Ariana Grande and Ed Sheeran, most of her listeners are people that follow her. They're her fans. They're people that have sought her out specifically. Let's keep going. On the other hand, the DaBaby is an example of someone where that is not the case. This is a clear example of someone who is on a Spotify playlist but doesn't have as many legitimate fans as it may seem. The ratio here is 14-1. So we have 43 million, 14th in the world in listens, and yet only 3 million followers. Only 3 million followers suggests that most of DaBaby's listeners are not fans. They're associated with his music is on a playlist or on some type of format that isn't directly related to him. People are listening to his music through a playlist or through other artists, but they're not listening because they're a fan of DaBaby. And this is a very, very telling statistic here. Notice that this person, DaBaby, is 14th in the world in monthly listeners on Spotify. He's famous, but he doesn't necessarily have as many fans as people who listen to his music. Now, look, if you have 3 million fans, you're doing all right for yourself. You're successful. I'm not trying to take away from DaBaby's career. What I am trying to say is that he almost has as many streams as Beyonce. He has more streams than Beyonce, and he has almost 7 times less fans. Let's go to a similar artist, Lil Baby. Not just in names, but he has a similar, notice the difference here. DaBaby has 43 million streams, 3 million followers. Lil Baby has half as many streams and a little bit more followers. So he has, it's interesting because it looks like he is on less Spotify playlists. He's been streamed less, almost half as DaBaby, but he has a little bit more followers. Now, you could say the reason, how can you have more followers and less streams? Well, if you look at the plays on DaBaby's page, it suggests that he is on more playlists. Now, notice that Lil Baby is on Rap Caviar, which is a massive rap playlist. So it suggests that most of his plays are probably coming from that playlist. Okay, let's look at some more normal examples of artists who are on Spotify that have a couple projects out and have an early indication of some popularity, but obviously not a megastar like Beyonce or Ariana Grande. Jude Smith is a guitarist and singer, someone I've come across on Instagram because of his, he has interesting postings and is a very skilled musician. But let's look at his ratio. He has 19,000 monthly listeners and he has 6,000 subscribers. So his ratio is 3.16. So it indicates that he has maybe he's not on a big Spotify playlist, but he has generated more fans per listens as opposed to someone like Lil Baby or DaBaby. It's a little bit more organic. It shows that he has more of a connection to the people that are listening to him. And perhaps that the people that are listening to him are people that follow him maybe on Instagram, or maybe people that follow him in terms of his concerts. This kind of suggests to me that he has a substantial following, and those people are listening to him a lot. If he were on a playlist, these numbers would be a lot higher. Okay, let's keep going. So this particular artist, 30, is someone that I've heard about through a producer named Kato. And 30 is a really good example of someone who is just starting out and has been around for a couple years, but he is clearly on some playlists, and it's obvious in the numbers too, but on the side here we see the playlist that he's in. But he is a classic example of someone who has a lot of plays on a playlist, but doesn't have near as many fans. This ratio here is 50-1. That means for every person that listens, one of them is following 30. So these numbers have been boosted by the Spotify playlist, but with 3,600, 3,600 is way more than I have. Of course, I'm not trying to discredit him because he's a new artist. But what I am saying is that if you looked at his monthly listeners, you would suggest you might think that he has a big following, but he does not, because most of the people that listen to his music are not his fans. They're not going to listen to his music. They just happen to hear his music through a Spotify playlist. Now, the biggest example that I have found of this situation is in lo-fi hip-hop. Most people I've come to see, as I've looked through these playlists, they don't really know who the artists are, it seems. And this is a great example of Axion, I think is how you say that. He has a ratio that's even bigger than 30's. 30's ratio is 50-1. Axion's ratio is 69-1. He is clearly on. Here's an indication of the playlist, Lo-Fi Beats, a super popular Spotify curated playlist. He has 750,000 streams and 11,000 followers. That makes zero sense unless he's on a massive playlist. Now, that means that if you go to these lo-fi beats playlists, usually there's like 10 hours of music on there. Notice that if you have millions of people listening, they may not get to his song in the playlist because it's so big. The sitting, in one sitting, you're probably not going to listen to 10 hours of music. But because the playlist is so popular, it demonstrates that all of his plays are coming from that playlist. Now imagine if he was dropped from all playlists, how many people that listen to that playlist know who Axion is? Well, who's to know? But I suggest that if you have a similar ratio to, say, Beyonce or Ariana Grande, he would have 22, that's 2 times, 2 to 1, 22,000 monthly listeners instead of 750,000. I mean, that's a big discrepancy. This is even greater. Delayed is an artist that's on several these lo-fi beats, lo-fi hip-hop chill, lush lo-fi hip-hop music. These are massive playlists, and it shows in his numbers. 900,000 monthly listeners and 6,000 followers. He has a ratio of 150 to 1. Notice that Ed Sheeran and Ariana Grande and Beyonce roughly had a ratio of 2 to 1. So for every follower, there's 2 people listening. This is for every follower, there's 150 people listening, which means that his numbers have been padded by Spotify playlists. Now, this is just a random selection. This isn't purely, accurate, test of what's going on here, but they are good examples of my point. Now, let's look at my page, for example. I have 15 followers and 34 listeners, which means that even though these numbers are minuscule in relation to, let's say, anybody, it's still a good ratio. It suggests that the people that follow me, and this makes sense because I'm just starting out, the people that follow me are the people that listen. Now, if I was on a playlist, this number would probably still be low, and the monthly listeners would immediately jump up. And that may be a temptation for me as an artist, but if I'm really in it about the music and I'm really in it about the fans and reaching people and I'm not just there to make money, then that shouldn't matter to me. I want, as an independent artist, to maintain a low ratio of followers to listeners. All right, so there you have it. That's just some of the data that I wanted to share with you today about this debate, this constant kind of information that we're receiving as independent artists about Spotify playlists. Yes, of course, if you want to get your streams up, Spotify playlists are a great thing. It's not bad. It's not bad to get exposure. It's not bad to get money. But as an independent artist, you need to think very, very wisely and clearly about what this means. There's too many people that are deceived into thinking that their career has started or has gained a lot of traction and have falsely put themselves in a position to where they're vulnerable. Maybe they quit their job, or maybe they start to spend a lot of money on certain things because they see that there's been some traction on Spotify. But let this be a sobering reminder that it's really, really important to maintain a low ratio of listeners to followers, because if those listeners aren't being transferred into a following, then you really kind of have an empty or a superficial scenario. Not to say that those Spotify playlists can't improve your following, because I think they can. But it's important to monetize or not monetize, to monitor and analyze the information, the analytics, the data. Because if your listeners are way off the grid as far as, the ratio from listeners to followers, then it really demonstrates that there isn't much of a fan base, and that the success is based on the dependence of the playlist. So I'm interested in hearing what you think about this. Have you ever felt pressure to get on a playlist? Do you think that is the only way to get on? Have you been under the kind of influence of other people talking about this on YouTube or on Instagram stories? And does this affect the way you think about it? Because as I started to look into this myself, I started to realize that maybe I don't need a Spotify playlist. Yes, of course it helps. Yes, it will help generate streams and therefore money. But if I'm wanting to build a music career, maybe it's best that I just build fans and followers the old-fashioned way. And that's through connection, and that's through being a human being with good music and being relatable. So, I'm not against Spotify playlists at all. I wish I was on one. That would be great. But at the same time, I'm very mindful that my numbers and boosted numbers on Spotify through playlists is not always, and is usually not, a good indication of my fan base and who is there with me through the long haul. So, thank you for listening. I wish you all the best. Please leave a comment, maybe subscribe if this was helpful or helped you think through some things. As always, I'm grateful for you listening, and we will see you again next time.